You didn't get fired. They just moved you to a department where no one talks, where projects go to die, where your badge still works but your presence doesn't matter. You sit there staring at spreadsheets that don't need you, answering emails no one reads, attending meetings that only remind you you've been quietly erased. At first, you try to make sense of it. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe I did something wrong. You start coming in earlier. You ask for feedback. You pretend the silence is normal. But deep down, a question grows like a splinter. Why am I still here if I'm already gone? It doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like something worse. Indifference. They didn't need a reason to get rid of you. They just needed time. Because the system isn't built to confront you. It's built to wear you down until you confront yourself. And the most dangerous part? They never told you to leave. They made you want to. And that's not mercy. That's design. This isn't stability. It's silent abandonment. And the truth is, you were never part of the plan, only the illusion of one. You weren't laid off, you were unchosen. Not suddenly, but quietly, so quietly you started to believe maybe it was your idea. And just when you think it's all in your head, you start to notice you're not the only one fading. The office is full of people like you. Eyes dimmed, voices low, no one was fired, but everyone's slowly vanishing inside their roles. This isn't mismanagement, it's a method. They keep you here, technically employed, while quietly draining the will that made you care. You stay because leaving feels like failure. You work harder because slowing down feels like weakness. But nothing changes, that's the point. They've built a system where you don't need to be removed. You just need to be slowly worn down until you remove yourself. You question your worth, your intelligence, your resilience. You wonder if you're just not strong enough to handle the pressure. But what you're really struggling with is engineered exhaustion, the kind that's framed as growth, sold as opportunity, and praised as loyalty. It's not about being productive, it's about being compliant. And the more you comply, the more invisible you become. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman once said, "Modern oppression doesn't need chains, it uses choices. They let you choose your burnout. They let you schedule your collapse. And when you finally walk away, they call it personal. But this was never personal, it was systematic. You weren't fired, you were emptied. Not because you were weak, but because the game was designed that way. And the cruelest trick of all, you thought it was your idea. So when they move you to another team or shift your role for alignment, you don't panic, you feel chosen. You tell yourself this is trust, a sign they still see something in you. They say it's a new opportunity, a chance to prove yourself again, and you believe it, because the alternative is too painful, that you're being quietly phased out. So you rationalize. They wouldn't waste time on someone they didn't believe in. This could be the step before a promotion. But the truth is colder. The new role is smaller, the projects are duller, the meetings shorter, if they happen at all. You start to feel like a placeholder, still sitting at the table, but not really part of the conversation. You try harder, hoping they'll notice. But the more you try, the more it feels like you're running in a maze where the exits keep disappearing. What you thought was a vote of confidence was actually a soft landing strip for your quiet removal. Sociologist Irving Goffman spoke of the presentation of self, how we perform the roles given to us in hopes of being accepted. And in this performance, we cling to the belief that being moved isn't rejection, it's reinvention. But deep down, something feels off. You're not being invested in. You're being depleted. And the hardest part to admit is this. You weren't being given a second chance. You were being used one last time. There was a guy on our team, quiet, reliable, always the first to turn in work, the last to take credit. For 2 years, he was part of the core product launch team, the kind of role where every decision felt like it mattered. Then one day, out of nowhere, they rotated him to an internal tools division. No one explained why, just a calendar invite, a friendly Slack message, and silence. The day after, he showed up to a different desk. The faces were new, the energy off. In meetings, his name wasn't mentioned. In the team chat, his messages got no replies. He told himself it was just onboarding, that he needed to earn trust again. but it never changed. No one asked him for input. He was assigned menial bug logs, QA tickets from 6 months ago. His calendar started looking blank. He stopped speaking up, then stopped showing his face on Zoom. His performance reviews dipped for the first time, not because he failed, but because nothing was expected of him. And slowly, the part of him that had once cared started to flicker. The worst part wasn't the boredom, it was the invisibility. It was knowing he was still on the payroll, still on the org chart, still breathing, but somehow not here. Sociologist David Graeber once described bullshit jobs as roles so meaningless even the person doing them can't justify their existence. But this was worse. This wasn't meaningless by accident. It was designed that way, and the cruelest feeling wasn't being let go, it was realizing you were never fought for. You were quietly let slip. He stayed for another 3 months, came in on time, finished every task, smiled in meetings that no one asked him to join. He still believed, maybe if I just hold on a little longer, they'll see I'm still valuable. Maybe this is just a test. But the truth was already written in the silence. No more invitations to key meetings. No more visibility on roadmaps. His name quietly vanished from org charts, replaced by someone newer, someone cheaper, someone with momentum. And then it hit. The transfer wasn't a mistake. It was the exit, just not the kind that gets announced. Because in this system, they found a cleaner way to remove you. One that doesn't need severance packages, awkward HR calls, or messy exits. They simply let the structure do the work, move you sideways, cut your relevance, wait. Eventually, your self-respect will finish what they started, and when you finally resign, they'll thank you for your time, maybe even smile. It's elegant, even merciful on the surface, but it's neither. It's a tactic, a way to avoid accountability while pretending nothing happened. Philosophers have long warned us. As Kierkegaard said, the most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. You were never on a path forward. You were being led out slowly, politely, with plausible deniability. You weren't reassigned, you were released. Without the courage to say it, and the most brutal truth of all is this: you weren't let go to protect the company. You were let go so they wouldn't have to admit they gave up on you. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. The way everything stays technically clean. Your title remains, your paycheck arrives, no one ever tells you you're failing. On paper it looks fair, no one harmed you, no one even raised their voice. But inside, something breaks, because the pain doesn't come from what they say, it comes from what they never have to say. That's the brilliance of the system. It doesn't fire you, it makes you fire yourself. It doesn't punish you, it makes you feel unworthy of staying. This isn't negligence, it's architecture. Michel Foucault called it a disciplinary society, a world where control no longer needs violence because it's built into routines, procedures, and expectations. Power doesn't shout anymore, it whispers through performance reviews, policy updates, and silence in the group chat. You internalize the gaze before it ever arrives. You manage yourself, you shrink to fit into the shrinking space you've been given, just grateful you still exist inside it. They don't need to tell you to try harder, you do that on your own, terrified of being seen as the problem. And over time, you become the enforcer of your own erasure. This is not miscommunication, it's design. Because when control makes you feel like your suffering is your fault, it no longer needs to control you at all. And the most invisible kind of violence is this: you still think you're free, because the cage was built to look like responsibility. So you start working later, you skip lunch, you volunteer for anything that might matter. You tell yourself, maybe if I show them I still care, they'll pull me back in. You rehearse casual conversations with your manager in your head, drafting emails you'll never send. You scroll through internal job boards at midnight, wondering if there's still somewhere in the system where you belong. But deep down, the silence grows louder. No one pushes you out, no one tells you to stay. You're left in a limbo that feels like both punishment and test. And somewhere between the endless effort and the lack of response, you start to split. One part of you whispers, they don't want you anymore. The other replies, you're just not good enough to be wanted. That's how it works. When control becomes silence, it turns inward. You don't resist the system, you turn on yourself. You analyze every interaction, every missed meeting, every delayed reply. You perform harder, not because it's expected, but because you're terrified of what the absence of expectation means. Psychology calls it learned helplessness, the point where effort no longer leads to reward, but you keep going because stopping feels like collapse. You're not trying to thrive anymore, you're trying not to vanish. And the cruel irony, they're not watching your output. They're watching your endurance, not your talent, your submission. And in the end, the breakdown doesn't come from what they do, it comes from what you start to believe about yourself. You weren't passed over, you were put on display. And the most painful part, you kept performing, hoping to be chosen in a room where they'd already stopped looking. And even as you begin to break, you still feel guilty for not doing more. That's the trap. The guilt doesn't come from failing the company. It comes from the feeling that you're failing yourself. You weren't asked to sacrifice your weekends, your sleep, your mental health, but you did. Willingly, proudly, because somewhere along the way, they made you believe that devotion was identity, that to care less was to be. They didn't demand your loyalty, they just made it the only thing you had left to feel valuable. And that's the genius of it. You weren't forced into servitude, you signed up for it, under the name of ownership, initiative, leadership, potential. You bragged about being the one who stays late, the one who just gets things done, even as you burned from both ends. You internalized their values so deeply that walking away didn't feel like liberation, it felt like betrayal. But who exactly were you betraying? A system that never promised you love, only leverage. A culture that never wanted your soul, only your stamina. The psychologist Erich Fromm once said, "The most dangerous illusion is that bondage is freedom." You weren't building a legacy, you were being harvested for your time, your energy, your silence. And the truth no one says out loud is this: you didn't give too much because you cared, you gave too much because you were never allowed to ask why. And when you finally begin to question it, when the fatigue turns into doubt and the silence turns into dread, you reach out. You talk to your family, your friends, the people who've known you the longest. You tell them things feel off, that you're not sure you matter anymore, that the job feels hollow. But instead of being heard, you're handed recycled reassurance. Don't give up too soon. It's just a rough patch. Every job has politics. And the worst one, maybe you're just too sensitive. So you nod, you smile, you thank them. Then you go back to work the next day, a little quieter than before, not because you're better, but because you've just realized how alone you actually are. No one wants to believe the system is broken, because they've already invested their lives in playing by its rules. School taught you to follow directions. Family taught you to endure. Friends cheered your sacrifices like achievements. No one taught you how to walk away from a structure that rewards obedience and punishes self-awareness. You're not just fighting your company, you're fighting every voice that ever told you this is just how life is. And in that chorus of good intentions, you start to question your own perception. Psychology calls it gaslighting, when one's reality is denied long enough that they begin to doubt it themselves. But this isn't just personal, it's cultural, it's systemic. It's a collective agreement to call collapse resilience and silence maturity. And the most dangerous part? It's not that no one believed you, it's that everyone needed you to keep believing in the lie. So you double down. You take new courses, you stay up reading leadership books you secretly hate, you send follow-up emails no one replies to, you build dashboards no one asked for, hoping they'll see your initiative, your hunger, your value. You think, maybe if I prove I'm indispensable, they'll bring me back in. Maybe they're just testing who still wants it badly enough. But what you don't realize is there is no invitation waiting. You've already been written out of the story. Your effort isn't opening doors, it's distracting you from the fact that the room has already been emptied. And still, you keep trying, because we're taught that effort is always noble, that persistence is always progress. But sometimes effort is self-betrayal. It's building a ladder in a room with no ceiling. It's investing in a structure that has already disinvested in you. The more you give, the more you confirm their decision, that you'll stay useful, even without meaning. that you'll keep performing even without purpose. It's a loop, one where your ambition becomes the leash. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when the why was never yours? When the purpose you were chasing was planted in you by someone else for their benefit? That's not resilience, that's manipulation. And the hardest truth to swallow is this: your greatest efforts weren't ignored. They were counted on to keep you compliant. And then, one day, something shifts. Not outside, but inside. You're staring at your screen, responding to yet another vague request, rehearsing a tone of enthusiasm you don't feel, when the thought hits, what if the problem isn't me? What if the game is rigged? It doesn't come as a dramatic outburst, more like a quiet recoil. Like your mind pulling back from a lie it's repeated too long. You start to trace it. Every time you tried harder and sank deeper, every time you took feedback as truth when it was just deflection, every time you mistook silence for stability. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like clarity. You didn't fall behind because you lacked discipline. You fell behind because the finish line kept moving and no one told you it was never meant for you. That realization doesn't bring peace, it brings grief, because with it comes the cost. You begin to see just how much of your identity was built inside someone else's maze. You don't just lose a job title, you lose the illusion that it meant anything. Psychologist Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the beginning of waking up, not with pride, but with mourning. Because you weren't lazy or broken or ungrateful. You were loyal to a structure that only needed your silence. And the most painful awakening is this: you didn't fail the system. You simply stopped mistaking it for your life. But waking up doesn't feel like freedom, not at first. It feels like free fall, like stepping out of a building you spent years convincing yourself was home. People think quitting is the end of the pain, but it's not. It's the start of a different kind. You wake up the next day with no meetings, no pings, no calendar full of things that made you feel useful. And for a while, that silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like failure echoing louder than applause ever did. You scroll past job postings, unsure if you're looking for work or trying to find yourself. You try to explain your choice to others, but most don't understand. Why would you leave something stable? You were doing so well. You smile, nod, shrink. You learn to grieve not just the job, but the version of you that needed it. Because to leave a system that defined your value is to be left with a terrifying question: who am I without it? Psychologically, it's an identity fracture, what researchers call role exit, where detaching from a deeply internalized label brings not relief, but disorientation. You thought you were escaping a cage, but you didn't realize how much of your identity was welded to its bars. Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But making something new from nothing, that's not easy. That's exile. And maybe now you understand why most people stay, not because they don't see the trap, but because they don't know who they'd be on the other side. But something strange happens in the quiet. Slowly, unglamorously, you begin to breathe differently. At first, it's just small things. Making coffee without checking your inbox. Noticing the way sunlight hits your desk at 10 IEM. Realizing you don't flinch when your phone buzzes. Then, something bigger. Your thoughts stop orbiting performance, deadlines, approval. You start reading for curiosity again. You pick up skills not because they'll look good on LinkedIn, but because they make you feel awake. You take on small freelance projects, maybe a class, maybe a break. But the shift isn't in the activity, it's in the authorship. You're no longer living in reaction to a system, you're creating from within. For the first time, your value isn't calibrated by someone else's feedback loop. It's self-defined, messy, non-linear, and real. The panic doesn't vanish, neither does the doubt. But now it's met with something new, self-direction. A psychologist might call this the transition from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. But it's deeper than that. It's a reclaiming of agency. It's the first time you ask not, what do they want from me, but what do I want from myself? Simone de Beauvoir once said, To be oneself, one must cease to be what others expect one to be. And maybe this is what rebirth actually looks like. Not fireworks, but refusal. Not rebellion, but authorship. And the most unexpected realization of all is this: you weren't afraid of starting over. You were afraid of no longer being controlled. So now you're here, not at the end, but at the edge. You've seen the game, felt the weight, named the silence. The question is no longer, will they choose you again? The question is, will you choose yourself this time? Because somewhere between burnout and awakening, between being used and becoming real, a new question takes root, one most systems hope you'll never ask. Who am I when no one's watching? That's where the real work begins. Rebuilding not just your career, but your compass. Learning how to want again without permission, learning how to rest without guilt. Maybe you're still inside it. Maybe you're still waking up, piece by piece. And that's okay. Awakening isn't an event, it's a direction. So I'll ask you now, have you ever been moved out of the spotlight and told it was development? Have you ever stayed loyal to something that only stayed quiet? How did you take your name back? Share your story below. Someone out there needs to hear it, and maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to redraw the map. Albert Camus once wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." So here's your question. Are you still being shaped by the system, or have you started shaping yourself? And maybe now in this moment you feel it, not a solution, not a breakthrough, but a quiet tension pressing against your chest. The tension between the life you were handed and the life you haven't dared to define. Maybe you're still at that desk, still logging hours, still telling yourself it's not that bad. Or maybe you've already walked away, and now you're facing the far more difficult task of rewriting what success means without their language. Wherever you are, the question remains, are you living a life, or are you surviving a structure? The scariest part of waking up isn't the realization that you were controlled. It's the responsibility that comes afterward. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And once you see the script, you have to decide whether to keep reading or start writing your own. Psychologist Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." So this is your space. What will you do with it? If you've ever been quietly pushed out, told to be patient while being erased, or felt the ache of performing for a system that never saw you, share your story below. Say what no one let you say in the exit interview, because someone else is still in the loop and they need to know they're not alone. You're not broken. You're awakening. And the most important choice you'll ever make is this: will you keep letting them write your value, or will you finally take the pen back?